This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
I just sort of stayed off social media and did the right thing, acknowledged that they were not great social media posts, apologised, and now I'm really just focused on delivering for those voters who voted for me and dealing with those challenges that I was elected to deal with, everything from the NHS to the economy.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, Medway Council continued trying to balance the books. A 40-year wait for a road project saga took a major step forward, and we welcome an MP who hit the headlines last year over some historic tweets. I'm Simon Finlay, local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who reports on Medway Council.
Hello.
And senior editor Matt Ramsden is here, standing in for regular guest Nikki White, who isn't around this week.
Hello.
And later on we'll hear from our special guest, Rochester and Strood MP Lauren Edwards. First up, Robert, what's been going on at Medway this week?
So, more details about the ways in which Medway Council are trying to balance their books and get on a strong financial footing, with the latest look at properties owned by the council which it is to sell. Back in November, the authority looked at non-operational properties. Those are ones where the council owns them, but they don't actually operate any services out of them, and identified up to 30 properties, including Temple Manor, a Grade 1 listed 13th century manor house, and Rainham shopping centre, for a possible sale valued up to £34 million.
Okay. So what's up for the chop now and how much they're looking to raise?
In total, they're looking to raise £20 million over 5 years, and the operational properties identified are several car parks, including the 544-space multi-storey car park The Brook, Chatham, adjoining the Pentagon Shopping Centre, the Rainham public toilets, and even the St George's Centre, which regular Medway Council watchers will know is a location where the authority holds its full council meetings, and since the main council building, Gunwharf, has been found to have rack in it, where most of the council meetings take place. In total, 10 operational properties have been identified in addition to the 30 non-operational ones. So Simon, what have you been working on this week?
Well, it's taken 40 years, but at long last, one of the county's busiest roads is going to be widened. It's happening at Kent Street in Merriworth on the A228 and will cost about 1.3 million quid. Local councillors have pressed for it after a teenage girl was hit and injured by a vehicle about 4 years ago. Councillor Sarah Hudson, who's the local county councillor, was one of the campaigners who wants the changes in order to cut speeding, improve safety for all users, including pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders.
So how's this being paid for?
Well, it's mainly through Section 106 money from developers from the time of Kings Hill being built, so that gives you some idea of how long this has been in the wings for. So it's been £1 million for the developer contributions and £300,000 from KCC. So what they're going to do, they're going to put some traffic lights in. So as well as the traffic lights, there's going to be a widening of the entrance to Kent Street and putting in just bus stops on either side, and this will have the combined effect of slowing down traffic, and anyone who's driven down there will know what we're talking about.
You said it was 40 years in the making. Why has it been so long?
It's just one of those projects that seems to have gone on, for forever and ever, and never seems to get the go-ahead. A lot of talk but no action. At KCC the other day, Councillor Harry Rayner, who represents a division nearby, said that when he was a new Tunbridge and Malling Borough Councillor in 1985, widening of the A228 was on the agenda for examination by the borough engineer in the autumn of that year, so which probably says a lot. So what's been happening at Westminster, Matt?
As most people would have seen, Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced this week that by 2027, the UK was spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. This is as we follow several other European countries in building up our capabilities. The ambition at some point is to get to 3%.
Yeah, so why are we doing this and who's talking about it?
OK, well, the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House has really upended the world, especially his decision to tell Europe not to expect automatic American support when it comes to security. Someone who had some interesting points to make about the situation is Tunbridge Wells MP Mike Martin.
What do you have to say? Why should people listen to him?
Well, he does know his stuff, to be fair to Mike. He's an Afghan veteran and a military expert. He sits on the Defence Select Committee and the Joint Committee on National Security. He says that the 2.5% isn't much and is in fact backfilling for cuts which have already been made to the military. For example, he says the cost of our nuclear deterrent has doubled from $5 billion to $10 billion a year since 2019. This money has been found by cannibalising other parts of the armed services. The planned increase in spending will just be getting back to where we were.
And does he have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, he says that it's essential that the army gets back to above 100,000 service personnel in number, and he wants a proper review done into the actual procurement system when it comes to the MOD, basically making sure that the armed forces get what they need rather than vanity projects like massive aircraft carriers that keep on breaking down. With this in mind, he says that our world has fundamentally changed recently and our government needs to seize the moment.
So the important question is, where's this money coming from?
Good question indeed. The foreign aid budget is going to see cuts of up to £6 billion a year. This is something which you would have thought unthinkable even a year ago, but there's been little political fallout as most senior politicians realise that the country's in a massively tough spot and this is a way to get out of it.
OK, thank you, Matt.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Lauren Edwards was elected to the Rochester and Strood seat at Westminster in July last year as part of Labour's historic landslide victory, which wiped out the Conservatives. But the honeymoon didn't last long. Ms Edwards was forced to apologise for a number of historic tweets, which emerged a little over a month after she was elected to Parliament. But more of that later. This is the first interview she's given since that controversy, and she's with me today. Lauren Edwards, welcome to the Kent Politics podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in today. Can I just kick off by asking you a little bit about your journey into politics? You grew up in Australia, you moved to the UK about 20 years ago, I think, and where you studied at the London School of Economics. So, what brought you to England?
Britpop.
Really?
Yeah, it was the place to be in the 90s. It's 20 years this year, so I'm thinking about having a big party to celebrate. I was originally only meant to come here for 1 year to do a master's degree at LSE.
But you're a British citizen because your mum's
My mum was born in Essex, yeah. She was one of what they call a £10 pom who went over in, I think, the early 60s and emigrated to Australia. So she's got a big sort of family history in Essex. So through that, I was able to get British citizenship, which I was immensely grateful for, and came over here for a year and just loved it and didn't want to leave. And I've sort of stayed here ever since, and originally was in London, and then I think around about 10 years ago decided to move out of London and just loved this area and moved everyone here.
Okay. Was it at the LSE that you sort of got involved in politics to begin with, or did it come later?
I'd always been interested in politics as a sort of young person in Australia, and part of the kind of whole Britpop, Britain being the place to be, for me was also seeing what New Labour was doing.
Cool Britannia, I think it was
Cool
called.
Britannia, exactly. There was a real sense of hope and optimism, and things were getting better, and it was really the place to be culturally and politically. So yeah, I just loved it, and sort of wanted to be a part of it. I don't come from a political family, so I think sometimes you speak to politicians and they say I was delivering leaflets, when I was 5 years old. Nobody in my family is political. Nobody has a particular trade union background at all. But just through my experience of being in work and of sort of, studying at school, I sort of ended up on the kind of centre-left politics and thought I'd be interested in seeing how laws were made and, how our society functions, and wanted to be a part of it.
So that was why you chose the Labour Party as opposed to, say, the Green Party or the Lib Dems?
I mean, I did look at other progressive parties, but the Labour Party, I think, particularly because of that trade union link, and I had sort of become involved in trade unions in my workplace because I saw them as, the real sort of foil to employers just being able to do whatever they wanted and representing people's collective interests. And so for me, that always meant that the Labour Party was the only show in town.
Yeah, okay. You worked as a parliamentary researcher for a number of MPs, not least Lisa Nandy, who's now the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. What kind of insight did that give you into the inner workings at Westminster?
So I think when I became an MP, I certainly didn't have maybe the rose-tinted glasses that some people had about what the place was like to work in. I knew that it was a place of high stress, of very long hours. It's not particularly, a modern workplace in the way that it's set up. It's a very, most people don't go to work in an office job and be in a palace. So I think I sort of had a realistic understanding of what a challenge it was going to be, and it can be quite an upheaval in people's lives. So I think I went in with a great understanding of the challenges that would be involved, the late nights, all that kind of thing.
What about the sort of working culture, the sort of culture behind the scenes, if you like? It's often seen as a very bit of an old boys club. Not always the best behaved.
Yeah, I mean, it's there are sort of, I'm always surprised when people are surprised that Westminster is different to how everything else is in society. They have bullying problems. They have, we've seen spiking problems in the bars. The only difference, I think, is that I think health and safety legislation doesn't apply there because it's technically Crown land. But it is like any other workplace. I mean, it is in some respects an old boys club, but I also have a background, working at the Bank of England in the finance world, and I would say far more often in that world I found myself the only woman in a room compared to politics, and particularly Labour politics, where we have really good representation of women.
Okay. You did work at Westminster, but you did spend a couple of years on Medway Council after a by-election, and you served in the cabinet.
Yeah.
At a time of a time of great turmoil and financial insecurity for most local government, was that a useful experience in terms of understanding the way modern politics works, especially at local government level?
Absolutely. I mean, I always say there's a really big difference between working behind the scenes in politics and actually doing it yourself, actually having skin in the game. One of the reasons that I sort of entered Parliament and decided to run to be an MP was because I enjoyed that experience of being a councillor so much that I decided that I wanted to do it full time. I started to enjoy politics and helping people and being out in the community and problem solving much more than I was enjoying my job in financial regulation. So I think particularly the biggest challenge for me, I think, was obviously when we were running things as the new Labour administration. That teaches you so much, learning from your mistakes, what works, what doesn't, how to run things, how to get the best out of people. It was a real eye-opener and was, I think, hugely influential in my journey about becoming an MP and feeling that I could take the next step up to represent even larger group of people and represent them well.
Yeah. You were elected to serve at Westminster. Sir Keir Starmer swept into Downing Street with a huge majority on an enormous mandate, and you're one of 412 Labour MPs in the House of Commons. I mean, that must have been quite a party for Labour after 14 years in opposition. It
was. I mean, for me, I was also in a state of exhaustion, to be honest, because I had been basically doing that full time. So because I'd been selected as a party political candidate, I had to take a year's career break from the Bank of England because they're not party political. They're neutral. So I had been doing my cabinet role and I had been campaigning to be the MP full time. So for about a year. So it was obviously a surprise election. So for me, there was a bit of a period of sort of stopping and sort of accepting the gravity of the situation rather than partying. I mean, obviously I was super happy. I mean, I was so excited, particularly on the evening when I saw the exit poll, and I thought, it was likely that we were going to take all 3 Medway seats. And, it was, for me, I was always throughout the campaign confident based on my experience on the doorstep that there was a real potential for change. And so to actually get it and to have the opportunity to put all of those policies into practice was just, phenomenal and very overwhelming.
Yeah, okay. Well, then a few weeks later, a number of tweets that you posted more than a decade before kind of emerged. When did you realise that story was about to break?
So I'm an early riser, so it's about 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think one of the drivers is that I had done I'd put out some communications the previous day, I think related to the riots that we were having, and saying, sort of calling for calm and sort of saying, you can't be engaging in this criminal activity. Protest is perfectly fine, but what we're seeing here is tipping over, and I think that probably led to some people who were unhappy with that probably going through, and probably for most of the night, to be honest, going through about 15 years of social media.
Do you know who that was?
No.
So at what point in the day did you actually realise that this was suddenly sort of going to burst into something else?
When I saw the first tweet at 6 a.m, because I'd worked in politics, I know how these things go.
Yeah, okay. What was your kind of reaction to that? How did you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I think obviously horror, that there's that period where you think, oh, actually, have I been hacked? Because you're using, particularly like, in my case, unfortunately, disableist language that I would never think that I would ever have used. And so it was just a sort of horror and shock and just sort of a disbelief, I think. And I think, it's always difficult when you go back and have a look at old social media posts, because it was a very different time. We were using social media in a very, very different way. And I guess I'd also been through some of my social media posts as well and hadn't really found anything that was concerning. So had
Did you not go through it before you became an MP or before you became
absolutely.
a candidate?
Everyone does.
Yeah.
But to go back 15 years, I think I must have missed some stuff or not gone back far enough. Yeah. Okay.
When things took a slightly dramatic turn when Elon Musk, possibly the richest man in the world, and possibly one of the most powerful as well, got involved by sharing your apology. I mean, what kind of reaction? How did you feel about that? What was it?
Well, I mean, I didn't necessarily see the response because I had come off, I had obviously recognised that the tweets, although, the intention that some people took away from them was not the correct one. I could see what they looked like if you didn't necessarily know the context of some of them. So I obviously came off social media because it's not a good place to be when there's a pile on. So to be honest, I didn't see a lot of the stuff that came afterwards. I knew that he had highlighted it and that it obviously reached a lot more people. But there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. No. So I just sort of stayed off social media and kind of did the right thing, acknowledged that they were not great social media posts, apologised, and now I'm really just focused on delivering for those voters who voted for me and dealing with those challenges that I was elected to deal with, everything from the NHS to the economy.
But were you prepared for the storm when it happened?
I don't think you can ever be prepared for a social media storm.
How did you cope with it then?
Sorry?
How did you cope with it?
Well, I think friends and family are really, really helpful. Obviously, you have to, acknowledge your mistakes. You have to learn from them. You have to think about what your job is. So, like I said, my job is to elect thousands and thousands of people in Rochester and Strood. I can't go and hide under a rock. Obviously, need a bit of time to deal with it, to process it. And obviously, friends and family are a huge support. You stay off social media because, it's not a great place in most circumstances, to be honest. I mean, some of it, Twitter is, or X now, is basically unregulated, but you just focus on doing what you are elected to do. And so I just kept myself very busy.
Notwithstanding the fact that you were probably a lot younger when you did.
I think that 15 years ago,
Yeah, when you did those posts. I mean, but, I have to ask, why on earth you put this stuff on the social media in the first place? Is it just a different time, a different...
Yeah, I think people used to put whatever random thought was going into their head on there. And I think it was, when I say it was a different time for social media, it was almost like treated like a diary almost. It just didn't have the reach. And I think we were less conscious about the way that things can be interpreted in different ways rather than the way that we intended them.
I suppose it was pre-Me Too, pre-sort of a lot of the culture wars and things that have evolved in recent times. But I have to ask, do you accept this stuff about Estonians and so on could be interpreted in a negative way, possibly xenophobic and borderline racist? Yeah,
well, the thing with the Estonian, it's not that I have some oddly specific xenophobia towards Estonian people. So this is when I referenced earlier the context. So at the time I realised was living in a share house, quite young, like people do in their early 20s, and I had an Estonian flatmate who was bringing people around late at night to basically have a party, and I was very conscious of having to go to work the next day. So, I think a sleep-deprived tweet of me saying, I wish these Estonians would get out is not about them leaving Britain. It's about me wanting wanting them to leave my house so that I can go to sleep and go to work refreshed. So that's what I mean about things being taken out of context.
Yeah.
But at the time, we just didn't really think about that. And so, it's not that I have any oddly specific xenophobic views towards people. It was a very particular context. And this is the danger of social media. And I think people are much more aware now. And, young people hopefully are much more aware about the dangers of this kind of thing, because things can be taken in a way that you absolutely didn't intend, in a way that obviously has reputational damage. But as I said, I know my character, I know my values, and I'm just focused on making sure that I am doing the best job I can as the MP for Rochester and Strood.
How's the whole thing? How you look back on it now? Sort of the storm was past. What have you learned from the experience? How's it left you feeling?
It's made me more resilient. I think it's probably made me more generous of other people who've made mistakes, more accepting of things that aren't always perfect. It's I try to practice stoicism, and I think it's probably made me a more stoic person and a more resilient politician as well. I would never want to have to go through that again. There are worse things, to be honest, that happened in my life last year, but you can't change the past. You can only deal with the future, and so that's what I'm focused on, making sure it's as positive as possible.
Yeah, sure. Do you think this has damaged your career prospects in the Labour government?
I'm not particularly fussed about my career prospects in terms of climbing the ladder. I'm very happy at the moment being a good Labour backbench MP. I have a little bit more freedom than I otherwise would have. I can make a huge contribution to really focusing on delivering for my constituents. The reality is I'm in a marginal seat, and I absolutely have to have all of my focus on making sure in 4 or 5 years' time, people in Rochester and Strood are feeling better. They're seeing a better health service. They've got more money in their pockets. The housing crisis is being tackled. That is what I have to focus on.
I did notice that the Conservative MP, Kelly Tolhurst, who you defeated to become MP, posted a strongly worded criticism about your apology at the time of the tweet storm. Said that you hold divisive and unpleasant views. Do you think she's after her old seat? She's pitching her tent?
Well, I'm not sure that what she's doing at the moment, so I absolutely wouldn't be surprised at that. She's often at events that I'm at. I think that's the case for a number of former MPs who lost their seats at the last election, so I wouldn't be surprised, but I also don't speculate. I just focus on what I can control and what I can do. Yeah,
okay. We're now 8 months into a new government and a new parliament, but the wheels appear to be wobbling already, and the Labour Party's crashed in the polls. Your leader is incredibly unpopular. What on earth has happened?
Well, I think nobody should have been under any illusion that after 14 years of the devastation of our public services and what the Conservatives did to the country, that it was going to be easy for Labour to fix things in 6 months. And even in the lead up to the general election, when we were getting a really positive response, I was very conscious about saying to people, we are not going to be able to turn it around in a matter of months. The problems that we are facing and that we're going to have to deal with if we are fortunate enough to become the next government are very deep and serious problems, and they are not ones that we can have quick fixes for. And so obviously, I wasn't necessarily expecting the first 6 months to be, or even the first year to be the first, sort of land of milk and honey, because we have all these huge challenges. But I think we are making good progress. I mean, you look at the investment in the NHS, you look at the planning reforms that are going to allow us to build more houses. You look at the complete shift in terms of the focus on net zero and renewable energy and what that could mean in a place like mine in terms of jobs and opportunities for young people. So I think although it's obviously not been entirely smooth sailing, there never is when you're dealing with some of the challenges that we inherited, I think that we are making progress. And I think certainly I have a lot of confidence that by the end of the first Parliament that we will have the beginnings of a really decent legacy.
How much do you think with the fuel payments, the changes to national insurance, the farmers' inheritance tax and so on has played into that sort of challenge that you talk about?
Well, obviously we've had to make some difficult choices. And not all of those have been popular. And, obviously, because of the size of the economic sort of black hole that we inherited, we've had to do a little bit more than we obviously would have wanted to do in terms of some of the economic measures that we had to bring in as part of the budget. But I think, in the long term, we have a commitment and we won that election because we had made such a strong commitment to decent financial management and making sure the economy was growing. And so I think think that I certainly have confidence that we are on that road.
But don't you see that there's always a chance that as a Labour Party, that if you make changes to winter fuel payments, it's a really bad look, especially when it does affect a lot of people who would probably gravitate quite naturally towards the Labour Party?
Well, I mean, in principle, I absolutely agree that I think that winter fuel can be means tested. I don't think we should have a situation where we, very comfortably well-off people were receiving this money and were telling us, I don't really need this, I don't want it. So I do agree with the principle of means testing it. I think one of the issues that we have, which you do have with legislation, is that sometimes you are capturing people who maybe you didn't intend to capture. So one of the things that I'm very focused on is those people who maybe haven't been able to get pension credit, which means that they would be eligible. Obviously in the aftermath of the budget, I made a concerted effort to write to people. We had an event at the Pentagon in Chatham to try and get people to sign up to pension credit who were eligible, who weren't necessarily signed up and didn't realise that was a key thing for them to be able to continue to receive this winter fuel support. So we have tried to make really positive steps to get people who are eligible to have it.
Sorry, but by that time the political damage was done.
Well, I think, obviously for some people it didn't send the best message to them, but I think what we need to focus on is those people who genuinely need the support. And one of the things I was really pleased to see announced this week is a consultation on widening the sort of warm homes grant, which could capture a lot of those people who maybe weren't eligible anymore for the winter fuel allowance, but were still not very well off and were still needing some support. So I think that we have recognised where, maybe the policy has captured people that we weren't intending to, and we're taking steps to do something about it, which I think is really positive.
Okay. And then you take something like national insurance, the two changes, you get the threshold and the actual rise in the amount that people pay. But you're not just hitting employers, you're hitting employers who employ people, who employ your voters. And that's a problem as well. Again, it was possibly a politically misjudged thing to bring in.
Well, I think the alternative would have been raising taxes directly on working people, and that we had been very clear that we wouldn't do that. So although obviously it was a very, very difficult choice, no one will be making that choice in an ideal scenario or with an economy that you had inherited that was, fully functioning, which unfortunately we weren't necessarily in that position. We had a terrible economic inheritance. It was much larger, the black hole, than we thought it was going to be, and it necessitated, unfortunately, this action.
As the new Rochester and Strood MP, Lauren, what are your aims for the local area?
So one of the things I'm particularly focused on is health and the problems that we're having locally with people getting hospital appointments, people being able to get a GP appointment. I mean, that's a national problem, but locally we have on the peninsula, nearby GP surgeries that are closing. We have a situation in Strood, is one of the only towns in Medway that doesn't have a healthy living centre, and we need to release some pressure on the local hospital, Medway Maritime Hospital. So I'm really focused on those challenges in particular, and I'm campaigning, for instance, for a new elective surgery in Chatham High Street that would help release some pressure on the main hospital and allow them to focus on accident and emergency, and also have that dual benefit of also helping economic regeneration in that area. Driving more people into our town centres has always been a real focus for me. The other thing I'm particularly focused on and campaigned on during the election is getting a banking hub, again on the Strood side of the river. Basically, Chatham is one of the only places I think in Medway now where you can go and have an in-person experience at a bank, and I know that's really important from when I was speaking to people, particularly on the peninsula during the election. So I'm campaigning and trying to get a banking hub there so that we can preserve that face-to-face banking that I know particularly older residents are really particularly keen to retain. campaign. And then the other things are the economy, and I've put in a bid for, together with the local council, for my area to become an artificial intelligence growth zone. There's huge potential, again, particularly on the peninsula, for a data centre. I know there are companies that are looking into it. We have a lot of green energy projects, renewable green energy projects that are coming there. And, my constituency has probably never fully recovered from the closure of the dockyard in the 1980s. We have hugely fantastic universities and a great skills base in things like engineering that are directly relevant to those kind of jobs of the future that I know are coming down the line with the Labour government in green industries, in construction. And we need to make sure that we are accessing those opportunities and the local people are getting the skills and the training. So I'm very focused on bringing in investment to create those opportunities and to put more money in people's pockets.
The electorate is clearly incredibly volatile at the moment, and some polls, Reform UK are top and Labour are quite a distance behind. How big a threat is Reform? I mean, not least because your old Medway Council seat was taken by Reform UK recently.
Which, was a very, very difficult moment for me. I was very proud for how long Rochester, East and Warren Wood had been Labour, and particularly to lose a seat by, I think, 21 votes is very difficult as a politician. But unfortunately, this is the world of politics. You have to face these things. Reform's resurgence, it's not a Medway specific problem. It's not a Kent problem. They are obviously becoming popular because I think they are peddling sort of easy solutions to quite complex problems. I think they are sort of reanimating a group of people who feel quite disaffected with the political system, and that's something that we need to address as a Labour Party, but the Conservatives need to address as well. I mean, if you look at how the Conservatives didn't perform well in the by-election either, so I think their polling numbers are terrible. I mean, absolutely dreadful. I mean, it's almost, but when you see three parties all are sort of polling 20 plus, and it's often Reform, particularly in the recent YouGov polls, which and they're sort of like 2, sometimes 4 points ahead. Yeah. And they came, I'm very conscious, they came a relatively close third in my election as the MP, and so I don't think that we are in any way taking voters for granted. We are very, very conscious about the threat of Reform, and we need to obviously listen to why they are so popular and think about how we craft Labour solutions to dealing with some of those problems.
Do you accept that there are voters out there, and it may be the 25% who are currently leaning towards Reform, and they're coming from all parties? I've noticed that there's even a small proportion of their vote coming from the Liberal Democrats, strange as it might seem. What are these that you can do to win their trust back? They've had enough. People are angry, and they are kind of mutinous, if you like. That's very difficult for you to win those people back. What stands between today and the next general election is a lot of time. Is that what you're banking on? You're banking on Reform just basically, messing it up?
Well, I think, they have in the past, in previous reiterations, they have shown themselves up when they have been in positions of power, absolutely. We're certainly not waiting for that to happen. I think we are pressing ahead with our programme of government that we know is going to deliver for people. So I'm very confident that at the end of 4 or 5 years, however long we have before the next general election, that the investment that we are making now in dealing with some of those problems in terms of housing, the NHS, the economy, the labour market, will mean that at the end of those 4 or 5 years, people will be feeling better off in a way that they haven't after the last 14 years. They will have more money in their pocket. They will see that jobs and opportunities are being created, that places like Rochester and Strood are getting investment. It's easier for them to book a GP appointment because we've tackled some of the issues that have led to the managed decline that we've had. So I'm absolutely confident that by the end of the next election, if we can show the people that we have delivered, that we have made their lives better, that Reform vote will go down.
Kent recently lost out on the chance to go onto the government's fast-track devolution programme, and many people have perceived that to be a bit of a disaster, not to get on the first tranche. Do you think it's a disaster?
I was disappointed. I wouldn't describe it as a disaster. I think the government's been very clear that it wants everyone to head towards a devolution arrangement, and I'm fully supportive of that for Kent and Medway. I think the extra powers, the extra funding that will come with it will really help us deal with some of the regional challenges that we have. I think we obviously just have to maybe not do it as quickly as we would like, but there's opportunities from that as well. Maybe there will be lessons that we can learn from the first priority programme that mean that we can get it right really early on when we do it in Kent and Medway.
Lauren Edwards, MP for Rochester and Strood, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you.
This week, Sir Keir Starmer set out plans to increase the defence spending, but will cut overseas aid budget in order to fund it. Reaction has been, to say the least, mixed. Rob, is this an exercise in soft power, do you think?
Well, I think it's an interesting move. Firstly, I think there's very few people who are going to argue with the case that we need to increase defence spending as part of GDP. I think there's very few people who will say that we shouldn't be doing that. The debate is over where should this money come from. And I think the classic argument, and I certainly agree with the argument, is that although aid a lot of time is characterised as sending all this money out of the country to other places, while worthy, is it the best use of money? In reality, it does a lot more than just sending money out. It's about supporting places that are in dire situations and tries to invest in those areas so that later along the track, if we're not doing it, nations like China and Russia are doing that, and they have developing for a long time. They've been investing in these infrastructure projects, particularly in Africa, that will then gain them the support of the governments in these nations around the world. I think it's kind of, although a lot of people characterise aid support as kind of quite, as you say, soft, and they really lean on that idea of soft, it actually is quite important in terms of relations between Britain and the rest of the world. So obviously I understand why he's made this decision. I mean, part of it is to sort of stave off Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. This is a line they've talked about a lot. But I think actually, longer term, it's not the best move because aid plays a role in our defence.
Yeah, it's a fair point that Rob makes. I've actually got some quite interesting experience when it comes to foreign aid, because as a young reporter in Africa, I used to go into townships and villages and watch as foreigners arrived to deliver aid or to come visit projects they'd funded, and they wanted to see where their money was going. They'd stay for a while, they'd get the kids to do a little dance, they'd go off, everyone felt happy. And then the local people would mainly fall about laughing that these people had come and spent all this money for nothing. It was a real interesting look at the situation, because you'll think that this money is going to good projects, but often the local people just thought, well, why are we getting this? They genuinely thought that. The thing about foreign aid, and it's been discussed for years and years and years by people, it's not really about aid, if you think about it. You hit the nail on the head there, Rob, talking about soft power. Foreign aid is about politics, it's about economics, it's about influence, it's about history, it's about making sure that China doesn't get into the game, and making sure that Britain or France or Germany or whoever it is has got a marketplace for their products and for their politics.
Okay. And someone, you touched on it as well, Rob, about is it just a case of trying to look tough in front of Nigel Farage with a couple of months before local elections where Reform are expected to do quite well?
I think definitely. I mean, if you look on sort of social media, who particularly among Reform supporters or the right wing in this country, a lot of the complaints are around, why are we sending this money out? We've got, people who need it at home and that sort of. So I think definitely there probably has been a calculation on Keir Starmer's part, or at least the Labour Party's part, to say, well, this can kind of stave off that reform angle. They have more recently been going in more of an attacking stance towards Nigel Farage and Reform rather than Kemi Badenoch, who in PMQs this week, Keir Starmer just called an irrelevancy. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if this, and along with other policy announcements in the future, we see more sort of not tacking towards the right, but necessarily facing Nigel Farage and the Reform Party in some of the messaging that they put out about policies.
But surely that's a very dangerous game. When you try to out Farage, it normally comes off very, very, very badly for people.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly an interesting political operator, Nigel Farage. But, I mean, let's get back to brass tacks here. If they didn't take the money from foreign aid, where are they taking it from? Of course, there's no easy answers here. And Britain, is on the bones of its backside economically. So some people might be upset by the foreign aid budget going, with good reason to be, but where's the money come from, Simon? If you were Keir Starmer, where are you taking that £5 billion a year from?
Don't ask me. I'm not in charge, am I? Where would you take it from?
I don't know. But no
Whitehall?
But no one voted for me. So, but yeah, it's a question. Everyone's always outraged about whatever the government's doing, what they're taking money from. But where are you going to find it? What is the answer, Rob?
A possible suggestion, I know it will be a controversial one, is to say that the highest tax bracket should possibly pay a bit more money. I know Keir Starmer talked about not increasing taxes on working people, but I think most people wouldn't pay that one, and that would raise a reasonable amount of revenue.
Yeah, but we have talked about this in the past, and people will always talk about what happened in the 1970s, where they taxed the richest so much. What they did was they just buggered off to France or elsewhere. They took their wealth with them. Yeah, they took their wealth with them, and these are people who create jobs. So the knock-on effect is negative.
I mean, equally, I suppose the argument in return would be, as you say, you've got to find this money from somewhere, and there's not been much hesitation in increasing taxes on lower income people. And you say that wealthy people are the job creators. The working people are the job fulfillers. They are the people who go out and work every single day. And although they're not owning Amazon and these giant companies that earn lots of money for very few people, they earn money for everyone.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. I mean, we have to see what happens. Luckily, we're not the ones making the decision.
OK, folks, that's it for this week. Thanks to Rob and Matt for their contributions. And don't forget to keep an eye on KentOnline/politics for the latest news from across the county. And you can also sign up for our newly launched Politics Briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't miss KMTV's Politics Show every Friday at 5 p.m. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.